Hey, what's going on, everyone? Today I'll be covering 50 of the most common project management industry terms that you should probably know. If you're a newer project manager, this will certainly help you in your journey of understanding what the industry is. And for those who just want to learn more about project management, hope you find this video helpful. Here are the 50 project management industry terms that you should know. Number one, work breakdown structure, WBS for short. This means taking a task or project that you have and breaking it down into the most simple form. So, for example, if you're building a house, it's breaking the house down into what are the materials that you need, what are the things that you're trying to build, so like the roof, the flooring, the ceiling, all of that stuff, breaking it down to the simplest form so that you can really understand how much time, effort, cost it'll take in order for you to get it done. Number two, contingency. So when things are contingent on other things, that means like they rely on a certain thing being done, or there's an order of operations. So in general, contingency means that some part of the project is relying on something else to be done or to be complete beforehand. Number three, RACI chart. So RACI means responsibility assignment matrix. And basically what it means is when you have a project, there are likely a lot of different parts, there are a lot of different people involved. So it's creating a chart, creating an organizational structure so that certain parts of a project are assigned to certain people. Just making sure that you have ownership and that you have accountability for getting things done. Value stream mapping. So this one is really focusing on delivering the best version of a product that you can to your customer. So thinking about what the value is they would gain, thinking about how much time it would take, and then focusing on what you need to either iterate, what you need to streamline in order to get the best possible version of what a customer would find valuable. Acceptance criteria. So this, generally in a project, when a project is delivered, your stakeholders or whoever's paying for the project will have a set of criteria that they will be evaluating whether or not the project was successful. As part of that evaluation, they will look at the criteria and they will see, okay, so Max did this project. Did it hit the standard that we agreed upon? Is it as good as we had hoped it was? That's part of the acceptance criteria. Work in progress, short for WIP. So basically, this means anything that is currently not complete yet, but that has been started. So basically, anything that is a work in progress. It's pretty intuitive. Servant leadership. So this is a great project management leadership style. And basically what it means is you lead by doing, you lead by action, you lead by example. So in the case if there's an issue, a servant leader will take the initiative to take the first steps in resolving or tackling the issue. And with that leadership, they will demonstrate that they are taking the initiative, they are doing by showing, and the idea here is you want to lead your teams and you want to show your teams that you're taking accountability and that this accountability is a great culture to build upon your teams. Risk register. So in a project, there are a lot of times things can go wrong. So the risk register is a preventative strategy where you and your teams, your clients, will create a document or some type of repository where you can store any upcoming risks or risks that you foresee that can happen throughout the project. The goal here is you want those risks documented. You want teams to be proactive about thinking ahead. And once the risks have been on the register, it's tracking them. It's making sure that you have a plan in place in case the risks materialize and become actual issues. Team charter. So this one it's not a necessity on projects, but especially if you're working with newer teams, it can be a very good value add. So let me explain. A team charter is basically a document that you build with your teams in the very beginning when you start working with them. And this is helpful because this document outlines, what things people enjoy doing. So it's like, what communication strategies or methods do your team members prefer? It's, how do your team members like to be managed? What are your team members' strengths and weaknesses? What are certain cultures that you want to set in place for the teams to work together through as you're on the same project? Some common examples are, in team charters, it's defining, what the communication expectation is. Certain responses should happen in X amount of time. All meetings, cameras should be on. It's establishing the ground rules for which your teams will grow and that your teams can be held accountable to throughout the project. Okay, triangular estimating. So we are going from team charter to triangular estimating. A little bit different, but in this one, it's a method of estimating, as you can imagine. What this really means is, you think of a triangle, you think of 3 points. And really, it's the exact same thing with the estimation here. There's 3 different things that you're considering. There is a low ball estimation, there is a high ball estimation, and then there's a conservative estimation in the middle. So basically, this can be applied to anything in a project, whether you're estimating the time, the cost, really anything that you can think of. It's taking those 3 estimations and then dividing it by 3 to get an estimate that you can use for the project. There are different estimation techniques. We may cover some more in this video, but in general, this is a technique that is not as great, especially when you have very low sample size, but it's one technique that you could use. Scope management. So let's first define what scope is. Scope is what all needs to be done in a project. So it's what the deliverables are, it's what the magnitude of those deliverables is, it's understanding how much time, how many resources you have for that, and scope management is an understanding of how you will manage scope. So if the expectation is you will have a house delivered in 3 months, scope management is you're holding your teams accountable to getting that project completed. And if your clients, if folks want to build 2 houses, if they want to build an additional hot tub with that house, and it'll take an additional 3 weeks, it's directing and focusing your teams back on what the key agreement and what the key deliverable is. So if your client wants to build a hot tub and you only agreed on building a house, it's staying true, sticking to what you guys agreed on, and then, if it needs to change, then having that discussion then, but making sure your teams are focused. Cost benefit analysis. This is a really big one when it comes to any project that you do, as there's always a cost associated with doing any type of work. So what this means is understanding for really any decision you make, if the benefit outweighs the cost. So for example, when it comes to hiring an additional team member, getting contracting work, working with a consultant, that is an additional cost that will occur. It's understanding what the value add of bringing that additional team member will be for your teams. More work could potentially be done. Does that work outweigh the cost of hiring someone new? Just one example out there, but a good way to think about this. Earned value management, EVM for short. So earned value management is comparing the planned and the actual value that you hope to get out of a project. So it's at a really high level looking at the schedule, the cost, and the scope of your project, where things currently stand in terms of the progress you're making, and where you are in terms of materializing that value that you hope to obtain at the end of the project. And really, the benefit here is by looking at the schedule, the cost, and the scope, you can get a good idea if you're on track or not. And this is helpful as a project manager because you want to make sure that your projects are delivered on time. Okay, Agile project management. So before we dive into the style of project management, let's first cover what Agile means. Agile has a lot of different definitions depending on who you ask, but in my opinion, it means being flexible. It means being able to pivot, being able to deal with changes, being able to lead your teams to be flexible in their approaches. So when we think about this as a project management style, this really means that you are taking a flexible approach to the project. You are, of course, you have a scope, you have a certain deliverable that you want to reach at the end of the project, but there may not be a set path towards getting to the end goal. Ultimately, you're empowering your teams to work in their methods that suit them best. You're empowering them to deal with changes, to think critically about those changes, and to make the best decisions in order to move forward. So it's a very flexible, very good style of thinking, especially when you're working with projects that have a lot of different moving parts, that have a lot of changes. So an example of this can be, let's say if you're working on a certain type of software that you're delivering to a customer. A lot of times, especially in SaaS, in other words, software as a service, the software is customized to the customer's needs, and if it's a very custom software product, you don't want to go from 0 to 100 and just have it completely built without having your customer's feedback, right? So maybe when you go from 0 to 10, that's when you pause and you have your teams, demonstrate, show the progress you're making, and get feedback from your client. Then from 10 to 20, you do the exact same thing. And you have these set intervals where you're constantly dealing with changes. And the end result here is you will have a much better final product when you reach 100 rather than straight up building all the way to 100 and your client not being happy. So it's integrating and incorporating all of those changes. Backlog, really simple one. This means your work is behind. What do you need to get through in order to catch up? Your backlog is like a list of tasks or things that need to get done that have not been completed yet. Baseline, it can have a lot of different meanings. Baseline for performance could mean the threshold that you must meet in order to meet the standard, in order to be considered at good standing. The baseline for a project could mean a certain time interval that you need to be at. Otherwise, the project is seen as behind. It really means setting a standard for whether it's performance, whether it's time, can be a lot of different things. Bottleneck. So a bottleneck is something that is preventing you from going forward. It's something that can prevent your teams from progressing. So an example of this is if you need to build a house and let's say you're working with a contractor who's doing the roofing, right? Well, let's say it's expected to rain the next week and you have a group of your best painters who are looking to paint the interior of the house. They already have the walls up, but you don't have the roof up yet. So a bottleneck to getting the inside painted would be getting the roof done first because you don't want the paint to drip with all of the rain and all that stuff. So think of a bottleneck as something that can prevent your teams from proceeding forward. Business plan. So really general one here, but it just means a plan for carrying out a project, a plan for how business will proceed. It will include the cost, it will include time. A lot of times this is like a project charter. It's essentially a document that governs that two parties are agreeing to the terms and conditions and the payment for such services. Burn rate. So burn rate can refer to a lot of different things. In terms of project management, oftentimes this refers to like resources. At what certain stage or timeline will you run out of resources? Will you run out of people that, will you run out of bandwidth? The burn rate is the rate in which you will either lose the resources that you have available. It could also mean in terms of finances. It can mean how quickly are you churning through your cash? Will you have enough money in order to reach the end of the project? Does the project budget allow you to get to that final stage deliverable, or do you need to be creative and cut costs elsewhere? Okay, change control. So this is really critical when it comes to a project. Most of the time in projects, things do not go according to plan. So in order to deal with these changes, you should have a system in place that your teams can follow in order to efficiently get through changes to understand what needs to be changed. Change control basically means you have a system in place. If there is a certain change that someone is requesting, what is the process in place that you're putting there so that all your teams can evaluate the change and they can decide together as a group whether or not the change is needed, and then to actually go ahead and do the change if needed. Critical path. So I like to think of critical path as what are the necessary things that need to get done in order for you to reach your goal. So really high level, if you think about, let's say, making a cup of coffee, the critical path would be you need coffee beans, you need some type of liquid in order to create the coffee, and at a very bare minimum, I'm not a barista, that would probably be what the critical path is. If you wanted to really spruce up your coffee, you could put some creamer, you could put some additional flavorings, but that is not the critical path. That is not the path that is absolutely needed in order to reach that end goal. Deliverable. Great timing to see this word here. Deliverable is the product of all of your efforts as a project manager. So deliverable can be a physical item. If your project is building a house, one deliverable could be the final home itself. Deliverable could also be a type of metric. It could be a type of thing that your clients are evaluating. So when it comes to that house, a deliverable could be building the house under a certain budget. It could be a certain metric that your clients are measuring you by. Dependency. Similar to contingency, dependency is something that other things rely on. So if you want to build a roof to the house, you should probably have the walls of the house built up first. So the roof relies on the walls being built before it can be assembled there. Estimate. Estimates are a way of understanding how long or how much or how many. It's a good way to get a ballpark of what you need or what needs to happen. So when it comes to your budget, having an estimate, whether it's, looking at previous budgets for similar size projects, that's one way of estimating. There are many different estimation techniques. You should definitely look into them. There's not a one-size-fits-all. Fishbone diagram. So fishbone diagram, I like to associate this one with another buzzword called RCA, root cause analysis. Really what you're doing here is when there's an issue or a problem, it's drilling down every little crevice, every potential tree to see, what potentially could have caused this. Fishbone diagram is one example of how you do root cause analysis. It's where you take a problem and then you break it down into what all the subproblems are, and then drilling down to the most small level possible to really understand, where could the problem have arisen. Gantt chart. If you're a project manager, you should definitely know what this is. It's a method of measuring, of capturing how a project is doing. You can, track phases, track timelines, track expenses, just tracking progress. It's basically another way of visualizing and tracking a project. Issue. Man, everyone has issues. This one should be pretty straightforward. It's a problem. Kanban. So this is, speaking of Gantt chart, it is another visualization tool to view a project or to view components of a project. A good way of thinking about this is, we all remember like sticky notes or flashcards, right? So when you think about a project, and let's say you use that work breakdown structure, a buzzword that I taught you earlier in this video, if you were paying attention, it's basically breaking down the project into smaller pieces. Well, let's say we wrote each of those smaller pieces on a sticky note. Next, the Kanban is super cool because picture a Kanban as like a whiteboard. So it's a whiteboard, and then you have your sticky notes. So the sticky notes are things that need to get done. So now, using your Kanban or your whiteboard, you're able to put your sticky notes in a certain order, and you're able to track all these little projects that will eventually become and build this big project. It's just a visualization and project management view and tool that is commonly used. Key stakeholders. Okay, so these are the folks who are ultimately the ones that you want to please, right? So you're building a project, you're working as a project manager. The key stakeholders are the ones who care about the project. So think about the executives. Think about the people who sign the contracting, the legal, the financial folks, the folks at a really high level who are giving the go-ahead for this project. Think about the folks on the ground level who are the ones who are going to be involved in either building the project or who have to deal with the results at the end of the project. Key stakeholders are your internal and your client-facing, your external counterparts. So it's anyone who cares about the project, whether it's financial, whether it's whatever motive it is. It's the folks that need to be aware of any updates, the folks that care about the results of the project. Okay, kickoff call. So this typically happens when you're a project manager and you work with a new client, whatever industry that may be. Your kickoff call is the first meeting that you have with your new clients. Basically, the purpose of this is to introduce yourselves, is to review any contracting, review any of the deliverables, the scope, to review what the end result should be, and then to start working together to start integrating your teams to actually get the job done. So the kickoff call is a great way to set expectations, to review previous expectations, and to align on next steps forward. Milestone. So a milestone is a way of tracking completion of a project. Mitigation. So this is preventing things from happening. Most of the time when we think of mitigation, we think of risk. Mitigating risk, not allowing risk to become an actual issue. Portfolio. So this is a collection of something. It can mean many different things depending on what type of project you work in, but in the cases of, let's say like real estate, your portfolio is the number of real estate properties, the number of homes, the number of physical things that you or your client owns. So think of a portfolio as a collection of a certain type of item or a group of items. Program. So this one's an interesting word because the way I like to think about this is when it comes to project management, when you first start off really green, as a project manager, you're probably in charge of, a fairly small size project just to prove yourself, to get your feet wet, to give you that experience. When you start getting more senior, you might become a program manager. And what this means is you're managing multiple projects. So an example of a program is, let's say when it comes to construction, as a project manager, your first project was to build a house. As a program manager, your goal may be to build a neighborhood, so a collection of houses. Moving one step even higher, as a portfolio manager, let's say that means you're now responsible or being in charge of the deliverable of a neighborhood, of commercial buildings, and of hotels. So now there's, things get bigger and bigger. You have more responsibility and you have more, so to speak, power, and with power comes responsibility, of course, that you need to own. So basically, it just means a much bigger project with much smaller projects intertwined between those. All right, we already covered project. I'm going to knock that one out. Project charter. This one I briefly talked about earlier in the video, but this is really just like a contract. It is documentation that specifies what the project is about, who needs to be involved. It's a lot of logistical things that you would probably want to know as a project manager in order to successfully complete the project. Project management. At this point in the video, if you don't know what this is, I highly recommend you just rewatch the entire video. I think we've covered this one quite well. Project manager, wow. I really, this is exciting to me because I put together this deck, this presentation of, the 50 most common, most, searched terms for project management, and yeah, we already covered that one, so no need there. Quality control. This one it really means ensuring that the project or the deliverable that you're giving to your customer, to your client, it is meeting the standard in terms of quality. So when we go back to that house example, if you're building a house and the roof starts leaking, it's still a house, but do you think that your clients will be happy with that? Probably not. I'd be pretty upset if I bought a house and it started leaking. So quality control is really important because it's testing and making sure that the product that you're building or delivering, it is meeting, the criteria that you're defining, that your clients are defining, so that when the end product comes out, it is at the standard that your customer wants it to be. Risk management, this means, again, pretty intuitive, managing risk. It's creating a risk register and making sure that you and your teams know how to deal with risk. Scrum Master. So Scrum is another style, another method of managing a project. Scrum Master is basically the head person who is facilitating, who is tracking. It's like a certain type of project manager. A lot of times they deal with software because Oftentimes, software has a quicker turnaround time, requires more input, more feedback, more changes. So the Scrum Master is in charge of making sure the project is moving along and that all the teams involved are completing their assigned duties in a timely manner. Time boxing. It means getting things done in a certain amount of time helps your teams focus on what needs to get done, avoids procrastination. Feasibility study. This means understanding whether or not a project or really anything is possible. So it's assessing the cost-benefit analysis. It's looking at whether it's a good business decision, whether you have the resources, whether you have the time to get something done. Stand-up meeting. So when it comes to Agile or like a Scrum Master, a stand-up is a type of recurring meeting. In the sense of software development, it's very common. It's a recurring meeting that you and your teams have to track progress, to make sure that you're making progress. Oftentimes these can be weekly, these can be daily, they can be bi-weekly, depending on the organization structure, but you have usually someone who's in charge, whether it's a technical program manager or a Scrum Master, and they're reviewing the progress, making sure folks are making progress. Waterfall model. This is a type of project management technique, and it means you're following a step-by-step process to get the project done. It is fully defined, so from start to finish, you're following this order of steps, and you should be following those steps to completion. On the other end, Agile model. This means you are planning for changes to occur. So you're deviating from the path, you're being more flexible in your approach. You're not really following a step-by-step process. Rather, you have certain checkpoints, certain milestones. And during those milestones, during those checkpoints, you're assessing whether things need to be different. And if they do, then you go ahead and make those changes. You keep doing that until you reach the end product. Statement of work, also known as an SOW. So this is a legal agreement between, some type of party, and basically it confirms, the delivery of services, the terms and conditions, any types of financial pieces that are agreed upon, and it's like the formal document that two parties or more parties basically sign to get a project up and running. Key performance indicator, KPI. A KPI it's like a deliverable. It's like a performance metric that you want to keep track of to see whether or not a project is successful or not. KPIs can be in terms of time, in terms of budget, in terms of customer satisfaction. There are a lot of different KPIs. Iteration. This refers, in the case of like software development and project management in the software space, it means making changes. It means looking at different versions of a current product that you have in order to make it the most appealing to your customer. So an iteration can be, let's say you have a Game Boy and your customer is like, oh, I want something a little bit better than that. I want something that's more wide. I want something that is faster. Well, if you iterate off a Game Boy, that turns into like a Nintendo DS, like a Nintendo Switch. So an iteration is another version of something that is hopefully better in what your customer wants. Okay, I think this is word number 50, on fire. So this is typically not the greatest thing to hear when you're a project manager, but when something's on fire, it means something is escalated. It means there's an issue that needs to be fixed, probably in a very timely manner. With all of these 50 very common project management industry terms, I hope that these will help you with preventing fires from happening when you're on the job. And I really hope that this video helped you in understanding what the terminology is and helping you in your career. So I've been rambling far enough now. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you all in the next video. Happy holidays.